Welcome to this tutorial on bulk loading orders. If you need to get multiple orders into Infoplus, put the order data into an Excel or CSV file and then upload that file into Infoplus. This tutorial covers what needs to be included in that Excel or CSV source file and then how to upload that file. Here is the source file that I'll use to demonstrate bulk loading orders. Your source file must contain a column for every required field. So any field that is necessary to create an order in Infoplus must be represented in your source file. Not every field has to contain data, however. For example, if you have the same line of business and warehouse for every order that you need to upload, you can leave those blank in your source file, and during the bulk upload you'll be able to select which line of business or which warehouse, etc. For each of these orders. So I've left these blank as well as media code and legacy restriction type. And if you're not familiar with these two fields, don't worry about that. I'll select some default values to use for these fields in just a second. So again, not all columns need to have data, but you must have at least the column listed here for every required field. And you'll be able to identify exactly what those required fields are within the bulk load process as well. If you do need to upload different lines of business or warehouses, these particular fields and some of the other ones are looking for IDs that you may not be familiar with, that may not be visible in Infoplus. So if you're not sure what Infoplus is looking for, at least use a consistent value to represent the information. So for example, if you have two warehouses, perhaps one warehouse you list as a 1 and one you list as a 2, and then during the bulk upload you'll be able to tell Infoplus which warehouse this 1 references, which warehouse this 2 references, and so on. So you can use your own values and then select which Infoplus value it represents. If the order date, if you want that to be today's date in all of your orders that you're uploading, you can also leave this field blank. There are two options for how your orders can be organized in your order source file. So in this example, I have one row contains one SKU and quantity of SKUs, but multiple rows can make up one order. So in this example, this is actually one order for Chris Collins. He's ordering 5 of this SKU and 5 of this SKU. This type of source file is referred to as tall format. Here's an example of what is called wide format. It's one row represents a complete order, so you have multiple SKUs listed in one row, and this is called wide format. So those are the two different formats that you can have in your source files. So again, our example is the tall format. Multiple rows may make up one order. For Infoplus to know which rows go together, they have to be next to each other. And it has to contain all of the same information in the non-SKU related fields. As soon as it hits some other information in a row, it will consider that a new order to be created. Let's go ahead and upload this source file into Infoplus. So I've got my source file saved here. In Infoplus, I just need to get to the order table to be able to bulk upload orders. So I'm going to use the dot on the keyboard and access the order table that way. From here, I need to go to the Actions menu and select Bulk Load. Here are the steps I'm going to walk through in the bulk load process. And here's the first question. Is your source file a wide format? Again, meaning multiple line items are in each row, or is it tall format where each row represents only one SKU and quantity, so multiple rows may make up an order? And that's the example that we have. So I'll select that option and click Next. Now I need to actually pick the source file. You can drag and drop it here or click this link. Here is the file on my computer. That is my source file. And we can see that it is now loaded here. Here is where you can see the fields that are required by the particular bulk load. You can bulk load other things than orders, and this required fields link will tell you which fields are required in your source file for uploading. You can also click this link and download a template file. It'll contain more than just the required fields in case you need to use more of them, but it's kind of a starting place. Okay, we've got our source file selected. I'll click Next. Now we're at the map column step. One note, do not use the back button in your browser if you want to go back to a previous step in the bulk load. That will just take you out of the bulk load entirely. So you can't use the browser back button to move back steps in your bulk load. All right, let's walk through this screen here. This first column is every field in Infoplus for an order record. This column is where you can pick a column from your source file to map to this Infoplus field if necessary. And we'll talk about these other columns in just a second. If you had a profile saved, which saves all of these field assignments, you could select it here, and I'll show you how to save a profile in an upcoming screen. So we're going to work one by one through these fields. We did not have customer order number in our source file, and it's not required. It doesn't have an asterisk here, so we're not going to do anything with that field. If you did want to put something into that field in Infoplus, you could certainly select a default value over here, or type in a default value over here. Line of business, if you remember, we kept that blank in our source file, so we're not going to map to it. Instead, we're going to pick the line of business for every row that's in our source file. And we're going to do the same thing with the warehouse. We're going to pick the warehouse to use. You can't select a default value and have a column chosen here. It's one or the other. So if you have this selected like this, you'll get an error on the next screen. So just make sure you're doing one or the other. We're not pulling the information from our source file. We're telling it what we want that field to be. Order date, we will pull that information. We did have order dates in our source file, so we'll leave that selected here. When we do the bulk upload, it will pull the order date from our source file and put it into the order date field in Infoplus. We'll do the same with customer number. Several of these fields were not in our source file because we don't need them. If you needed them, you could map anything accordingly. Carrier is something we need to map. You may have noticed, let me bring up the source file again here. We have different carriers for our different orders. UPS ground is sometimes represented by UPSG, and sometimes it shows by UPS ground. FedEx is represented by FedEx. We can tell Infoplus to map the UPSG value from our source file to Infoplus's value for UPS ground, and the same with the UPS ground value here, and with the FedEx value. We can make sure we map those properly to Infoplus values. This is done back in the bulk load screen. On my carrier field here, I am going to map it to the carrier field. I want it to look in that column for the information, but I'm going to check this checkbox right here, which is under a column called Map Values. That will allow me on the next screen to tell Infoplus what each one of my carrier values means. Okay, for media code, this is one of those fields we left blank, so we're just going to select a default value. Media code indicates how the order was taken, for example, by phone or fax or in writing. So this information can be used for billing or reporting purposes. If you don't use this information, it's still a required field, so we have to put it into our source file, but you can just select one of these options here to fill into your order. The same with legacy restriction type, and remember, when you map a default value, you need to unmap the actual field in your source file. Same thing with legacy restriction type. This information indicates any restrictions on how much or how often someone can receive inventory. So if no restrictions, just select interim. So I'll scroll on down here to check on any other required fields. Ship to information is properly mapped to the same named field in my source file. If it wasn't selecting the correct column, if I had it named something and Infoplus didn't identify it properly, when I click this drop down, these are all of the columns in my source file. I can pick which column it's supposed to be mapped to. And we've got SKU and quantity down here. So that looks good. The only field I selected map values on was the carrier field. So when I click next, it takes me to the map values step. If I had not checked that checkbox for any of the fields, it would have skipped this step. So here's the values it identified in the carrier column. It wants to know which Infoplus value to use. So UPSG represent UPS ground, and in my example, FedEx represents FedEx standard. So now Infoplus knows what to do with these values. I'll click next. We are now at the review screen, so we can see the results. Our results are good. It tells us that this order will be inserted. Every one of these orders in my source file were successfully read by Infoplus, so they can be uploaded. Here is where you can save this information as a user bulk load profile. I'll click here and I'll just call this is my bulk load order profile. I'll show you how you can use that profile in just a second. So my next step is simply to submit this upload. It's going to load every one of my records, and now I'm at the confirmation screen and it's telling me that each of these orders has been inserted into Infoplus. So for example, we've got this order number 58 here. Let's just double check that. If I go to the order table, there's order 58, which I just uploaded using bulk load. Okay, I'm going to go back to the bulk load process so I can show you a couple additional tips. So I'll start off as if I'm going to bulk load the same file. Go to the Actions menu, bulk load. My source file is tall format. I'll select the file. Now I'm at the map column step, and remember this is where we filled in all of this information. I saved a profile, so I'm going to click the Saved Profiles drop down. There's the profile I just saved. When I select that, it remembered my selections. It remembered the map values for the carrier. So all of this was pre-filled for me based on my profile. When I click Next, it even remembers the values I had mapped, but gives me an opportunity to change it. Click Next again would take me to my review screen. And notice since we used a bulk load, since we used a profile, we now have the option to click here if I made changes to save over top of my original bulk load profile, or if I want to save it as a new profile. Be aware that you can also share bulk load profiles. I'll click on the menu item, the menu icon in the upper left, and select Infoblocks, and I can go to the Manage. I can go to the User Bulk Load Profile table. Here's that profile I created, and right here I would be able to actually share it with somebody else. And they would then have that profile available to them when they were doing a bulk load. Okay, lastly, I just want to share a few different errors that you might see on that review screen when you went through the bulk load process where we saw the results that the order would be inserted. Here's an example of an error. If I hadn't mapped the carrier value to the Infoplus values, Infoplus would not have known how to read the carrier field, and an error like this would appear. So when Infoplus can't read data, it indicates invalid integer. Here's another example. This is indicating that one of the required fields was missing data in the source file, so the bulk load would fail. So anytime you get an error like this, the bulk load would fail. You would need to fix your source file and start the bulk load over again. And that was a quick tutorial on bulk loading orders. Be sure to check out the knowledge base article for the step-by-step instructions in writing. Thank you.